Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us again today. I am honored today to be joined by our own CPD Police Chief, Chief Roddy, who's going to talk with us a little bit about crime in Chattanooga, crime prevention, and everything he sort of does. Welcome, Chief Roddy.
I'm glad to be here.
We are glad to have you. Why don't we start a little bit, just for people who don't know, with some of your background. How did you get into policing to begin with?
For those that have not endured listening to my bio, I will be happy to go into a short version again. I'm a native Chattanoogan, born and raised here. I went to Tyner High School and went away to college to MTSU, graduated and came back here. Got into the police academy a short time after that. Started the academy in 1995, and I'm in my 26th year with the Chattanooga Police Department. Been fortunate to have a diverse, exciting, and absolutely enriching career in law enforcement. But more importantly, I'm absolutely humbled and proud to be married to my wife, Shannon, and have two lovely daughters. So we've spent pretty much our entire lives here in Chattanooga. So Chattanooga is part of us and we're part of it.
Which is great. I mean, this being your hometown, would you say that's given you sort of a little bit of extra insight as police chief doing this job?
Absolutely. Having seen, and I'm amazed constantly when I reflect back, not only to when I first became a police officer, but being from here, watching the transformation. We all reflect on it, but the transformation of downtown. I can remember going down there with my dad. He retired out of combustion engineering, having worked there when he returned from his military service, and just seeing the growth in all of the downtown areas, the different parts of our community. It doesn't look like anything I would have ever predicted. It's far exceeded expectations. So that constantly energizes me for what else Chattanooga has in store. So that's the good part of it. And then there is the reflections of being a police officer here for 26 years, where it does give me pause, where I can see parts of our community that I have not seen a lot of growth or change from when I was a rookie. And that is concerning. That is a part of our community that we need to do better in. So it's a two-edged sword, both of which are good. So I get energy from it, but then it also helps me understand where we need to focus our energies and our transformation more in this city.
Sure. And I'll just tack on to that. As you're looking around at Chattanooga, how does our city compare to others in terms of crime?
It's a difficult task to compare. I can go find similar police departments. Right now, your police department, we are staffed and budgeted for 500 sworn police officers and 124 non-sworn, or as we refer to as professional staff members. Well, I could go find an agency of similar size. You then have to overlay so many comparative points to truly be able to put an apple against an apple. But what I always caution people is when a community talks about itself, and this is all communities, but we pay particular attention to making sure that people understand how individualized our community is. Chattanooga is the best this. We do this way. Greatest mid-sized city. It's a great place for tourism. It's a great place for industry. I could find another city of 500 sworn officers, and they could have a completely different makeup in the community. They could have a completely different center in their economic focus. They could have no tourism. They could be heavy tourism, big sports teams, no sports teams. It could be North Dakota, it could be the end of Florida. Your crime rate could be totally different per capita in different crimes. You could have a certain community that faces an exorbitant amount of suffering relative to violent crime, but their property crime rate is very low. And you could have the flip side of that. So getting into comparing Chattanooga to other cities, it helps a little, but I try not to get stuck into that. I prefer comparing Chattanooga now to Chattanooga a month ago, to Chattanooga a year ago, to Chattanooga 5 years ago. Find what you're trending in. And I think that is a better marker of how we are doing as a city and where we can improve. And the things that we're doing well, don't touch them. They're working.
Okay. Well, can you speak to that a little bit? What are those trends you're seeing?
In violent crime, which is the topic many of us focus on, and we should. That is the type of crime that has the most direct and tragic and traumatic impact on another member of our community. Pay attention to our numbers and what they look like. When you talk about your homicide rate, which everybody fixates that on homicide as the true indicator of violence in the community, and I can speak to why it isn't, in my opinion. But when you get into that high level, high focus type of violent crime, our numbers in 2018 trended down considerably in 19, and then in 20 stayed current. So we were actually on the decline in our number of homicides. So that's a good indicator. The part that shows an indication of how your community responds to homicides are your clearance rates. That's the ability of your investigators to either make an arrest or clear the case out for not prosecuting in some manner through the investigation. The clearance rates in Chattanooga in 2017 were around 47%. The national average is 60. In 2018, it went up to around 62 or 63. 2019, we were well above the 80th to 84th percentile on homicide clearance rates. That's an indicator of how much the community trusts its police department. Technology is great. Everyone that's ever heard me speak knows I'm a huge advocate for cameras, public safety cameras, private camera systems, anything that captures and helps us investigate a crime. But homicides have to be, they need the community's input. People need to tell us what they saw, what they know, who was where were they. And if the community does not trust its police department, those conversations break down or never occur. The fact that our clearance rate is that high in homicides, I believe, is a true quantifiable, qualifiable example of how well the community of Chattanooga trusts its police department. So when you get into that part of the violent crime, Chattanooga's, I don't want to say we're doing a good job because one is too many, but our numbers in homicides have gone down for several years in a row or stayed flat. When you get into aggravated assaults or shootings, which is a good number of those, in 2018, we began to trend down. 2019 moved back up a hair. I hate to say it. When you mix in a pandemic and social justice conversations, social unrest in some cities after the murder of George Floyd, 2020 was the anomaly of data that really makes it difficult to judge what the presence of crime looks like in a city. There were so many outside factors that changed and contributed to change in human behavior that it's hard to compare 2020 to other years. So I'm not saying we skip it. There's parts of 2020 we're paying attention to, but when you look at our 18 and 19 numbers for the city of Chattanooga, your police department and your community was doing a very good job of addressing what I believe is one of the truest indicators of violent crime, which are shootings. So those trend parts are good. When you talk about overall crime in the city of Chattanooga, 77% of the criminal acts that occur in Chattanooga connect to theft. Whether it's a car being stolen, something being stolen out of a car, shoplifting event, a larceny event, things like that, a property crime base, that makes up 77% of the crime in Chattanooga. So when you hear this over fixation at times on the fact that violent crime is off the charts, if you will, it's really not the predominant driver of our overall crime numbers as a community. It's simply one person taking something of value from another person.
Okay, well, that was going to be my next question, what the most common crime is, and you just answered it. So are there some things that both the CPD is doing to address property theft? And then on the flip side of that, are there things that citizens can do preventatively to help with that as well?
Absolutely. In the property theft area, the one number that we're seeing, and this is an experience across the country that has started to go up in any city our size or larger, and many cities smaller than us, is the increase in auto thefts, which is where an individual steals a car, or theft from a motor vehicle, which is where they unlawfully enter a car to take something from someone. Those two categories alone have skyrocketed across the country. And again, we can go into the dynamics of work from home, individuals stay inside their homes, don't even check their car for 2 or 3 days. Instances like that. Driving to infrequent areas, you go out in the public, there's less public out, therefore there's fewer people present, which means sometimes crime can come into those areas if they have a feeling that they're not being observed. There's nothing to dissuade them from that criminal activity. So we're looking and have been to figure out how to increase the message. When we started running our numbers for 2020 in January, we knew what we were going to find. We found that over half of the vehicles stolen in the city of Chattanooga in 2020 were unlocked with the keys in them. which I know it sounds shocking of why make it that easy? But again, we need to study human behavior. That's what law enforcement does. So with the advent of electronic key fobs, if you will, what we're seeing is car owners simply leave the key fob in the cup holder, or they'll leave it in a purse in the back seat, or they'll leave it in a jacket pocket laying in the front seat. And we actually have watched through Ring systems, Nest systems, neighborhood camera systems, our own public safety camera systems, it changed the behavior of our suspects. And I know many of you have already seen this. Individuals walking down a street checking door handles on cars to try and find the car that's unlocked. Individuals walking through large parking lots, whether that be at a mall or a business or downtown or whatever it looks like, an apartment complex, late at night in the dark, just checking door handles. And when they check one, it pops open. Suspect will get in, sit down, and in a matter of seconds have gone through the console, the glove box, looked around the car, dropped the visor, see if there's anything of value, and they're usually gone in 20, 25, 30 seconds. The suspect's behavior has changed now, is that many of them, the last thing they do is they put their foot on the brake and they push the button on the dash. If the car starts, they drive off. They literally don't look for the key. If it's there, the car's going to start and they will drive off with the car.
Wow.
I think it was in 1 year, I think it was don't quote me completely on the number, but I believe it was 880 vehicles stolen in 1 year, unlocked with keys. So the separate dynamic, and this is another part this is the part that truly concerns me as chief of 500 police officers that are out there 24 hours a day, standing in those streets, working to protect and serve, is last year we had 220 firearms stolen out of unlocked vehicles. We had another 167 that were stolen out of vehicles that could not be confirmed as locked or unlocked. However, often there's no damage on scene, which means there's no vehicle glass on the pavement, which stands to reason the vehicle more than likely was left unlocked. So you have anywhere from 220 to 387 firearms stolen in 1 year that are now out on our streets because an individual left them in a vehicle potentially unlocked. So that's troubling for me. That's troubling when a moment ago we were talking about the level of violent crime. I read a synopsis 3 days ago. We had 3 firearms stolen out of unlocked cars in one night.
Wow.
Yeah, it's shocking. So again, to your question, what can we do? If everyone start to look around the city, we have started an increased educational campaign, marketing, if you will, of signage at the airport, at local malls. We're putting bus wraps on some vehicles. I had 2 of my officers film a public safety announcement with a little bit of satire to it, but talking about the frustrations of vehicles being left unlocked, with some information from me in that PSA about what our community is experiencing. All of these and many others that we're still continuing conversations with for billboards and everything else. And I will say, and list them all by name because I'm going to forget somebody. Every business that we have reached out to, every medium that we have connected with has been absolutely gracious and supportive of helping us in any way we could get this message out. And the message is simple. Lock it, hide it, hold it. So lock your car, have to leave something of value in the car, hide it, put it in the trunk, cover it up with a jacket, slide it underneath the seats so you can't see it in the window. But better still, hold it, take your valuables with you so they're not in the car at all.
Okay. So are you seeing, and maybe the data doesn't get this granular, are these thefts happening just out of people's driveways? Is this something that's happening when people go out and leave their car unlocked in a parking lot? Both?
It's everywhere. In 2020, theft from motor vehicles, theft from autos, as we call them, there were 3,229. Those are spread across the entire city in any venue you can imagine. So it's everything from apartment complexes to on-street parking to driveways in neighborhoods to malls, parking garages again. I don't know of any area that I could say right here telling you is off limits to consider as a potential target. So it's anything that can be done, again, locking the car. As I said a moment ago, I'm a huge advocate for private personal camera ownership, bright lights outside of your home, motion activated lights. Another thing that's very important in addressing any type of crime is a strong neighborhood. I live in a neighborhood. I know who my neighbors are. I know what they drive. I pay attention to their travel habits. I know what time they usually leave for work, what time they come home from work, what their kids drive, who plays in what yard. I pay attention to the 6, 8, 10 houses around me. And if I see something that's abnormal, causes me concern, I take note of it. If it's of real concern, I'll try and call my neighbor. If it's an emergency, I'll call 911. But I pay attention. If I see something that gives me fear or fear for someone else, I do something about it, report it. If you live inside the city limits or wherever you live, call the local law enforcement. If you see something, say something. I reflect on this often to kind of talk about changes in how a city moves. And you asked me a moment ago to kind of talk about how Chattanooga was. And I think this is kind of how our country has been. Our very architecture has changed our propensity to get to know our neighbors. So if you look at homes built in the 1950s, 1960s, I remember my grandparents' house, my parents' house when I was younger, huge front porch, big open steps, enough room on either side for 1 or 2 porch swings, because who can't have a front porch in the South without a porch swing? And neighbors sat on their front porch, and neighbors sat across the street, and people walked by, and you waved, and you got to know one another. If you look at architecture now, most front porches are stoops. They're not very big. They don't have much seating. So there's no real reason to get on the front of that front porch. But what's behind all of our houses? An absolute fantastic deck, or an outdoor kitchen, or a pool, or 2 hammocks. So we've moved our families into our backyards. Well, I may only speak for myself, but the only people that come in my backyard are people I know, or my family. So if I'm behind my house and my neighbor's behind their house and the other neighbor's behind their house, we may go weeks without seeing one another. And that's not a fault. It's an observation of, if the way we're set up now doesn't create it by happenstance, then we have to be deliberate in creating those connections. So if it's just a neighborhood gathering, if it's a neighborhood Facebook community group, whatever it is, next door program, stay constantly communicated with those that live and work and play and raise families around you. And just pay attention for one another. I sleep better knowing that I have 20 sets of eyes on my street helping me pay attention instead of just me paying attention.
Okay. And you mentioned that you're in favor of technology, cameras, stuff like that. As someone who has a Nest camera on their front door, how often does that sort of stuff come into play with crimes like this as well?
It is more common than not that a piece of technology is leveraged to help us solve a crime. Now that technology runs the spectrum. It can be something as simple as a ring system or Nest system, and we have a theft or motor vehicle report, or we have a motor vehicle stolen, or we have a burglary in a neighborhood, something like that. We're able to get that footage from those homeowners, and it helps us solve the entire scale of crime, from the minor misdemeanors all the way up to the most tragic of felonies. It is not uncommon for personal use cameras to help us, but also private sector cameras in the business world, we leverage those constantly as well. So everything from your local malls to your hospitals to businesses, if we have a crime that occurs in a particular area, that is one of the first places that our officers and our investigators are going to find that information. And we've done it with such repetition. It's just a matter of business with us now. Most of our officers already know the point of contact with many of these businesses, so that process tracks a lot faster. And then the last large scale section of technology relative to cameras are our police department's public safety cameras, which directly tie into our real-time intelligence center. Those constantly produce either video or still footage, which helps us solve everything, as I said a moment ago, from homicides and shootings to robberies, all the way down to traffic crashes, serious crashes, things like that. So we're constantly working the camera side of it, but that also puts in some other parts of our technology with our NIBIN system, National Integrated Ballistics Information Network. That is a national network of firearms evidence, and your police department is considered one of the best case practices in the country for how to prosecute violent gun crimes. The gun itself. There is trace evidence that we have the technology here, and we recently received another grant for $700,000 over the next 3 years to increase our capabilities in that firearms evidence area. And through partnerships with the ATF and DOJ and BJA, we're actually able to now get more funding in, increase our NIBIN capacity, And that's just the leverage point. We have found, as I said a moment ago, anywhere from 220 to 387 firearms stolen out of vehicles this year. As we start to find evidence that links those, we'll be able to backtrack, break the cycle of violence attached to that gun, because evidence shows that an illegally possessed and used firearm that's used in the commission of a crime, once it commits or is connected to two violent acts, it's 60% likely that it's going to be connected to a third within 60 days. So getting to where that firearm came from, where it's traveling to, how do we connect it to other crimes, helps us break what's called the cycle of violence relative to that gun itself. So your police department, it's cameras, it's real-time intelligence, it's analyst networks, it's predictive analytics, it's different database programs relative to focusing finite resources in government, all to address the different types of crime you and I've been discussing.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier, that there's a lot of firearm theft happening. To go back to the violent crime piece for a moment, since that is the thing that, tends to frighten people the most. Can you speak to what that tends to look like in Chattanooga when it happens?
As far as how the actual event occurs?
When we're talking about homicide or assault or something like that, what are we usually really talking about when that comes up? I mean, what are the odds that you're a random bystander who's going to get caught up in something like that?
I don't have a percentage to give you. I can say, after being an officer for 26 years and paying particular attention to our data in recent years, that the odds of you being a victim in a targeted act of violence is very, very small. Most crimes that involve an act of violence, an active shooter, aggravated assault shooting, a homicide, even many of our robbery cases, there is a relationship established to some degree, some depth, between suspect and victim in almost all of those instances. We also studied our suspects, what they looked like about 5 years ago. And after we studied 3 years worth of data relative to homicides and shootings, we determined that 0.04% of the population of Chattanooga accounts for about 65 to 70% of its violent acts. So 0.04% of a population of 180,000, you're talking roughly 700 individuals. So if you don't have a direct relationship with those 700 individuals, then it's not very likely that you're going to be a victim of crime associated with that 70% of the individuals driving our violence. Now, I will not say there is not a stranger component to certain types of crime, and that's where we ask individuals to follow tips that we pass along all the time. Park in a well-lit area, park where there's heavy traffic, pay attention to your surroundings. If you feel nervous about something, pay attention to it. Trust your instincts. If you don't like the way something feels, back out, call for police, call for a security guard, if one available that's near you. If you're pulling into an area and you don't like what you feel, drive away. Just be aware. We caution all the time. You've seen the videos where the individual's looking at their phone while they're walking down the street and they fall into a pond or they fall into a small hole, or they stop looking at your phone. Look up, pay attention to what's going on around you. And if you don't like it, don't walk into it. And if it makes you that more nervous than that, call us. So if you do that, you're not touching that 0.04% of the city of Chattanooga that has a propensity to drive our violence. The likelihood of you being an actual victim in one of those violent acts is very, very small. There is another dynamic that we can talk about, is just how Chattanooga pays attention to crime. When the incident occurs, and the incident is not debatable, whether that is a shooting or a homicide or whatever that is. Mm-hmm. The way information flows out of police departments, because we want to get our information straight before we release too much. We work through an investigation, we try and confirm things as quickly as we can. So the incident happens and it posts to media, which is their job, right then. Then responses are asked for from us, and we're able to provide those in the next 24, maybe 48 hours. So then that same incident that was reported on Monday is again reported again Tuesday/Wednesday with our responses and updates. And then if there's another component of that story, which either has community interest or a victim has more to tell, or we've come out with more information about it, or we've made an arrest in it, then that posts with another update. That single incident that occurred on Monday has stayed in the news cycle till Thursday or Friday. So the question that I ask people all the time is, when you hear the story in your neighborhood, we've had 10 burglaries that occurred in our neighborhood in the last month. When we go in and look and pull data, oftentimes in those community meetings or on Nextdoor or in Facebook community groups, which I love the fact that they're there because we can help get correct information out quickly. But when you dial into a lot of those situations, it was 1 or 2 burglaries, but the story's been told 10 times. So it's, if you hear something, go to a trusted source and find out what occurred, what's being released. But I also would like to see, and I don't have the solution for this, but why are we talking about the same thing for 5 straight days? So if anybody has any input on that, my email is droddy@chattanooga.gov. I'd love to hear any suggestions you have to help me work through that dynamic.
You heard it here first, folks. If you have that answer, please email the chief. Well, that brings me to sort of my last question here. You did mention earlier, that 2020 is an anomaly of a year.
That's one thing I've called it, but I won't repeat some of the other stuff.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Which certainly makes it hard to draw conclusions out of it. But one thing, you mentioned we did see out of 2020 is this broader call for social justice, equity, changes in the way that communities are policed. Can you speak a little bit to how CPD has reacted to that and the steps you're taking?
Absolutely. Something that it generated in us was a very, very dramatic understanding of we need to do a better job of making sure our community understands who we are as their police department. In the early stages of all of that in June this past year, there was a proposition that came out called 8 Can't Wait. It was 8 components that police departments should consider about how they go about being a police department. We grabbed those very early on. And as we reviewed the 8 points, it became evident to us we were pretty much in compliance with all 8 at that time. What we needed to do was 2 things. We needed to strengthen our internal language, not only for us as an accountability factor as police officers, but so the community understood the importance of what we were placing in that point. So one of the items was a duty to intervene. So as soon as we grabbed it, within a matter of days, we put a very strong section of language in our policy so officers understood. But the point that I pushed back was our officers already understood that. It has never been a culture in this agency, and I feel that way for many, many agencies across the country, knowing men and women that work in those agencies as well, that no one would stand by and watch another officer knowingly and willfully harm another individual. We just won't do it. But the community needed to hear us say it in as strong a language as we could. So we did that. We then got into one of the things was they wanted police departments to ban chokeholds. As I said a moment ago, I've been a police officer here for 26 years. We have never taught chokeholds. We have never put it in our use of force training or our continuum, as you will, of how we deal with responses to resistance to arrest. We've never done that here. But we didn't have in our policy a piece of language that said chokeholds are banned. It's one of those things you can only prohibit so many things by policy. If you made a list of everything you couldn't do, our policy manual would be tens of thousands of pages long. What we do is we tell you these are the things that you are trained in and that are permissible in how to deal with situations. And in all but the most dire of circumstances, you cannot use any type of what's called a lateral vascular neck restraint or a chokehold or anything like that because we don't teach it. So it was requirements for de-escalation, certain conditions before using deadly force, using a use of force continuum, which we've had as long as I've been a police officer that I can remember, and then comprehensive reporting requirements. We were already doing all of those things. So that was the importance of helping our community understand this is what we do. This is who we are. So we put all of that up, city website, we put out press releases, press conferences, talk to the media to get that message out of what we do as their police department already. And that's just one example of some of the items we've done to address an absolutely deserved expectation to know more about their police department from our community. We also entered what's called the Racial Equity Dashboard. We had some extremely talented individuals in city government, and we started working on this a considerable time ago. We were just now able to make it public, and we were very excited to do it because the timeliness and the relevancy of it could not have been any more important than now. Is it showed the entire community of how its police department goes about doing certain things, how we write citations, what do we write citations for, how do those citations break down? Is it for a safety aspect, such as speeding, running red lights, running stop signs, or is it more of a socioeconomic attached citation, such as improper lighting, driving without a driver's license, things like that? And we found some things that we expected, which showed that our police department, when it comes to writing citations for individuals for safety violations, driver behavior, we write citations almost directly in line with the demographics of our city. The inequality is not causing us to change how we do things. It's just making sure that we pay attention to how we're doing it. However, when we looked at our citation rate relative to socioeconomic citations, we have a disparate number of citations written into certain segments of our community, specifically Black and brown members of our community. So then we took a moment to figure out, okay, what do those citations look like? It's improper lighting, it's improper tags, it's suspended driver's license, cracked windshields, failure to appear in court. Not necessarily the officer's discretion on what is going on. One of the leading ones was financial responsibility, which is proof of insurance. If an individual is in a crash, we are required by law to ask for proof of insurance and cite them if they do not have it. So it's not officer's discretion. So now it creates the question of, what do we do as a city? What do we do as a police department to lessen the likelihood of that connection between that driver and police? How do we get the lights fixed? How do we get the tags renewed? How do we get individuals that are having trouble obtaining insurance? How do we get them insurance? So when you start to remove some of those socioeconomic barriers that produce these violations, you're going to lower the likelihood of a disparate application of enforcement in certain parts of the city. That's something we learned from this, and it's been fantastic over here. It has generated some great conversations both inside the department and outside, and some good ideas of what we can do as a police department to address it. And the equity dashboard goes on to explain, how our use of force is applied, in what circumstances, and what percentages, at what rate of use of force reports actually produce a complaint, and then what produces a sustained complaint after that. So it's a great source of data. I encourage everyone that hasn't had a chance to see it, go in there and open it up, learn more about your police department.
Okay. Absolutely. I'm going to give the last word to you here, Chief Roddy. If there's a particular message that you would like to get across to the average Chattanooga citizen that you feel like maybe doesn't get out there often enough about crime or the police department, what would that be?
The same message that I pass along to your police officers every opportunity. Do not pay attention to what a national narrative looks like. From me to anyone watching this, I do not care what the perception is of a police department 600 miles from me. I care every day about what job this department is doing for you as a community. So when I say that, I'm here often. And I even had this happen the other day. I had a member of my agency submit a letter of commendation on the actions of 6 of his officers, and they had done some phenomenal work. And in that letter of commendation, all the way down, it actually said, and I wanted to take the time to thank them for a thankless job. So I got that letter and I walked to that lieutenant's office and I said, is the level of irony apparent when you actually put in a thank you letter that you would like to thank them for a thankless job? And I just looked at him and he put his head down and started laughing. He goes, all right, I understand what you're saying. If you call it a thankless job enough, it is one. You say your police department is not doing this, then it's not. If you say your police department is doing this, then it is. This community supports this police department, and I see it every single day. And I see the men and women of this police department perform absolutely amazing acts every single day. We focus on that. If we're doing a great job, tell an officer that. If you see a police officer standing somewhere, thank them. I cannot express to you how much it recharges their batteries when a community member takes the time to show appreciation for what they do and acknowledge the difference they make. I promise you, the dividend you get from that officer's batteries being recharged when they come back and work the district around wherever you're working or eating or playing or raising your family benefits you as well. So the cynicism, the what's everybody doing, why are they not doing it? 2020 took that out of us. We gave it enough of that. I say in 2021, let's take the opportunity to thank each other for what we're doing, recharge each other's batteries, and I promise you, you will reap the benefits of a police department that feels appreciated. They will continue to do what they do, and they'll step up to whatever level they need to step up to.
Well, I will take some of that advice, and thank you for both being here, taking the time to talk with us, and the work you and the rest of the folks at CPD do every day for the city.
My pleasure,
Thank
sir.
you so much.
Thanks, sir.